My father was that typical taciturn Scandinavian, you know. If you live in the Midwest, you know all about them. There are lots of them, and that can be quite a good thing, as a matter of fact. But at any rate, I never knew as a child whether my father loved me or not. I never, ever remember having had a hug, let alone a kiss, in my whole life from my father. So there was room for doubt, you know. He was a silent presence who did his own thing. Well, it was only when I became an adult that I really realized that my father loved me, probably loved me and my brother very passionately, but was simply a person who was unable to express it. And it was when I was doing some writing as an adult that I finally recognized that fact, that there was, when I was 12 years of age, there was a Christmas Eve at my grandmother's house, and I had my first big solo to sing at church for the musical part of Christmas Eve's main service. This in a very large congregational church with wonderful choirs, wonderful music in Moline, Illinois. Well, I had a solo, and I had worked to get that solo down just so. But this particular Christmas Eve, along about the time we sat down for supper, it began to sleet. And it wasn't just a little bit of ice, it was a heck of a lot of ice. And by 10 o'clock at night, everything was ice covered. The sidewalks were ice covered. The streets were ice covered. You know, everything was covered. And it was a wondrous, beautiful fairyland outside of ice that was glittering in the street lights and in people's Christmas lights in their windows and on trees inside and out. And it was gorgeous. And everybody kept saying, "It's too dangerous to go to church tonight. Definitely too dangerous. Not safe to try to navigate 25th Street Hill, which is 2 blocks long and very, very steep in Moline, Illinois." And I was adamant. I am going and I am going to sing. Shouldn't go. No, not possible. Can't do. I'm going regardless. I'll make it on my own. And finally, my father said, "I'll go with you." And so at 10-something in the evening, we set out on a 12-block, very dangerous 12-block walk, which included a hill that is very, very steep and brick and 2 blocks long. And we got all the way there in silence. My father was lost in his world of thought, and I was lost in mine, and I was utterly entranced by the physical beauty of all of this ice on branches that are rustling a little bit, the play of white lights and colored lights on it. And it was a world that was beautiful, and I was quite happily ensconced in my own personal silence. And we got to the top of the hill, and my heart sank. That hill was 2 blocks long. That hill was a sheet of glare ice. No other way to describe it. There was not enough snow on the grassy berms so that we could walk safely on those and only need to navigate, little sidewalks or something, which would probably have been a doable thing. That wasn't possible. It was just a sheet of ice. And I knew I wasn't going to get to sing my solo. I knew that we were going to have to turn around and go home. And my father stood there and said not a word. And my father quietly took off his overcoat, laid his overcoat down on the sidewalk, sat down on the overcoat, patted behind him for me to sit down behind him on the overcoat, and off we tobogganed down that 2-block hill and managed to stop ourselves, not easily, but managed to stop ourselves so that we could make it the last 3 blocks to get to church so that I could do what I always wanted to do. And I was appreciative at the time, but much more appreciative of that experience as an adult, because eventually I wrote about that experience in a little diary that I kept for a long time. And in that diary, I put down that it was the first time in my whole life that I realized the depth of my father's love for me, that he was willing to possibly ruin an overcoat that he would not have been able to afford to replace for the sake of a little girl who wanted desperately to sing her first solo.